This week, the right-wing Christian movement to ban some books from libraries is growing, with one school district in Texas pulling all versions of the Bible and the graphic novel version of the Diary of Anne Frank. So I talk with Laney Hawes, a parent at that school district, about what's going on. I'm Lev Gringaus, and welcome to The Jews Are Tired, your podcast about Jewish news. This episode is sponsored by Unpacked. Picture this: Israel 2022. A crowded bus breaks down on the side of a desert highway. Who's sitting next to you, and what secret will they reveal? The newest podcast from Unpacked, Homeland, 10 Stories, 1 Israel, will keep you on the edge of your seat as each passenger's story unfolds. Meet the Russian immigrant who escaped the Soviet Union and the Jerusalem native whose family traces back over 400 years. Each week, you'll meet a new character whose story will take you for a ride, so get on the bus, grab a window seat, and settle in for Homeland, 10 Stories, 1 Israel, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like this podcast or Jewfolk generally and the work that we do, support us by buying our merch. All the classics are there: 10,000 Ways to be Jewish designs, The Jews Are Tired mugs and shirts, and just a plain TC Jewfolk logo on stuff if that's what you're into. A link to the store is in the podcast notes, so go take a look. And there's also a link to donate to Jewfolk in the podcast notes if you want to give directly. We appreciate any support you can give. Also, if you want to subscribe to our weekly TC Jewfolk newsletter for all the local Minnesota Jewish news, or our new monthly podcast newsletter where you can get updates on all our podcasts, go to tcjewfolk.com and hit that subscribe button at the top of the screen. We've got some new projects, by the way, in the pipeline that you won't want to miss. As of the release of this podcast, it's day 187 of Russia's war in Ukraine. If you want to donate to help Ukraine, there's a link in the podcast notes with resources to do that. Okay, on to the main focus of this episode. On August 16th, administrators at the Keller School District in a suburban area of Dallas-Fort Worth told librarians and teachers to remove 41 books from classrooms and libraries. They ranged from children's book I Am Jazz, an autobiographical story by Jazz Jennings, a transgender YouTuber, to Rupi Kaur's poetry collection Milk and Honey, along with all versions of the Bible and The Diary of Anne Frank, the graphic novel adaptation. The administrators weren't at fault here, by the way. The school district board told them to pull any book that had been challenged by parents over the past year. It was a culmination of a movement in the district, one that is being seen across the country by right-wing Christians to remove certain books from schools. The books, these right-wing activists claim, are sexualizing kids, are inappropriate reading, and amount to giving kids pornography. These same activists claim that teachers are using these books to groom children for pedophilia. Some of you might remember earlier this year the graphic novel Mouse about the Holocaust being banned by a school district in Tennessee because the book included swear words. This is in a similar vein. Now, why do we know so much about this situation at the Keller School District in Texas? Because one mom with children who go to the schools there, Laney Hawes, tweeted about the books being removed, and boy did everyone see the news. And what's notable isn't just that the books were pulled, but that the books were pulled after undergoing a vetting process where every book challenged by parents was analyzed by a committee to decide whether it should be kept in the district. And Laney Hawes had been on some of these committees, including the one for The Diary of Anne Frank, the graphic novel. So Hawes, who is originally from New York, has been kind of the spokesperson against the school board's actions, and she was kind enough to say yes when I tweeted at her to ask for an interview to talk about this situation. She isn't Jewish, but the movement to remove books obviously affects Jewish authors, Holocaust and anti-Semitism education, and Jewish kids in public schools. And I think that's important to remember. It's like the people raging against what they say is critical race theory in schools. These movements to police what teachers are teaching and what kids are reading and learning has all minorities, including Jews, in the crossfire. So we have to understand what's happening and, even more importantly, how it's happening. And I think Hawes does a really good job of laying that out and how right-wing Christians are using hyper-local politics for their own gain. And also the harassment she is dealing with as a result of speaking out, which frankly is particularly awful for women online. And on that note, I've got links in the podcast notes to an excerpt from the book, How to Be a Woman Online, and a link to buy the book itself, which is by Nina Jankowicz, a disinformation researcher who wrote up how women in particular are affected by online harassment and what platforms should be doing about it. By the way, if you want to revisit the episode where I covered the anti-CRT movement and how it risks shutting down Holocaust education in this country, just look for episode 63 of this podcast. The last thing I'll say before getting to the interview is that we have to be honest with ourselves. Part of the reason this story has gotten so much airtime over the past week is because the school district pulled the Bible and the Diary of Anne Frank. Jews and Jewish stuff is really good at pulling attention. And if the Bible and the Diary of Anne Frank hadn't been removed, how much would we have heard about this? Would Jewish outlets like the Jewish Telegraphic Agency have covered it at all? And I'm flexible with where I find my Jewish angle on some of the stories I cover on this podcast, but still, I don't know if I would have had Hawes on otherwise. And I think that's worth thinking about. All the places in this country where activists are trying to ban books that you may not hear about because they aren't the kind of books that grab that kind of attention. Okay, enough food for thought. Onwards to the conversation with Hawes, who has a lot of details that you wouldn't expect, and some you might. By the way, just to give you a sense of timing, this conversation was recorded on Monday, August 22nd, about a week ago, and Hawes was gearing up for a particularly contentious school district board meeting that night. This conversation has been edited for length and clarity. Enjoy. Let's back up a little, sort of before the Diary of Anne Frank and the Bible and a whole list of other books were suddenly pulled from your district's libraries. When did you as a parent first notice the sort of wave of activism around schools, specifically accusing teachers and librarians of, giving pornographic materials to children? Because more than any individual book, the story is really about sort of the broader political movement around this. So have you seen that develop in your district?
That is 100% the truth. So last fall of 2021, it was right after kind of like the COVID brouhaha had died down. Our kids were all going back to school. They didn't have to wear masks, and the year before they had. And I had a friend reach out to me, and she's an ELA teacher, a 7th grade English language arts teacher. And she sent an email, and then we talked, and she said, "Hey, I'm really, really nervous about what's happening about ultimately book banning around the country." She said, "We just got an email from the district telling us that they were going to be pulling all of our students' access to all these online libraries because of complaints from parents in the community and concerns that our children were being able to access inappropriate materials that weren't age appropriate and whatever." She said, "I don't know what's going on, but I'm really concerned." So I said, "Oh, I'm going to look into this. This is something I'd be interested in." I actually called the district curriculum specialist, and she said, "Yeah, we found that some of these materials online don't have age categories at all. So some of our younger kids are having, and she said, we're doing a review. We're working with the companies and seeing if they can help us create age limits for certain grades." And that to me was like a pretty reasonable answer. I was like, okay, that makes sense, right? We don't need a 3rd grader to have access to some of the books they have in high school. I completely agree with that. But I decided I was going to go to the next board meeting and just share my concern that, hey, I think this could potentially be a slippery slope. I'm grateful the district is protecting our kids. And I spoke, and it was really, really simple. They actually thanked me afterwards. And then a few other people spoke, and I recognized their language was really loaded. They had that tone of book banning, and they were complaining about like the woke indoctrination of our kids. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a problem. So I went to the next board meeting. I started talking to friends, and it was starting to ramp up, and you were starting to see people all over the country talk about it. And then we had a Texas legislative member. His name is Matt Krause. He released a list of 800 plus books, and it was for parents to look at and go compare it to their children's school district's library catalog. And he wanted everyone to be very concerned with what, public schools were teaching kids and to get involved. So a bunch of parents, a handful of parents, a small group in our district took that to heart, and they went to the libraries and they sent their children into the libraries to pick out the most egregious examples they could find. And then they threw a fit. And they posted them all over social media. And there was one book that kind of started all of this, and it was called Gender Queer. And it just turned into an absolute disaster from that point. And I started going to more school board meetings, and I was watching them talk. And then I was watching these people threatening the board members, not threatening them physically, but saying, we're going to replace you with board members who hear what we want. Our school district actually pulled the book Genderqueer from shelves permanently. They said, you know what? We do think this is inappropriate. They pulled it. No question. Within 15 minutes of it going viral, they pulled it. But then these parents were like, that's not it. We have all these other books we want you to pull. And they started saying, pull this, pull this. And our district said, okay, listen, we have an established process in place. If you want to challenge a book, you can challenge a book. And so this group of parents got online and just started challenging book after book after book. And then they started coming to school board meetings, screaming and yelling about how teachers and librarians were grooming children for pedophiles, how they were sharing child pornography everywhere. A few parents said they were going to go file police reports with the local police department against the librarians in the school district. And our board was like, we do need to take this seriously. We're working with librarians. We're working with curriculum directors. We're going to do these book challenge committees. We hear you. And they said, no, that is not enough. These should be pulled from shelves. These should absolutely never be allowed in schools. And the board kept saying, okay, we're in this process. We have these book challenge committees. And they just kept saying, no, we are going to get you fired. We're going to replace you. I immediately signed up to be on the book challenge committees. They sent out a call to the community. Anybody who wanted to participate on book challenge committees can. So every committee was different. And it was a group of district staff, librarians, teachers, administrators, parents, and community members. They were all about like 7 to 10-ish people. And my name was called up for a few books. The second book my name was called up for was fast forward all the way to April. All of a sudden, the school board elections are starting. They're starting to yell and scream. They have the candidates they've picked that are going to fight against pornography in schools. The messaging is outrageous. We're getting flyers that say, keep porn out of your schools. These school board candidates will do that for you. The other ones are grooming your children. They're making you feel, your children are being made to feel guilty for being white. They're going to send boys into the girls' bathrooms. I mean, it was an endless barrage of flyers. And then in April, right before the election, I was called up to be on the book challenge committee for the Diary of Anne Frank, the graphic novel edition. And I thought it was weird. Okay, what's wrong with this book? I read the book, went to the book challenge committee. There were about 7 or 8 of us, I think. And the person who challenged the book didn't show up to share their concerns. They were welcome. Every book challenge committee, if you challenged the book, you were invited to come and share your concerns with the book. Nobody showed up. All of us just kind of sat there and looked at each other like, why are we here? This is unbelievable. We discussed how beautiful the book was. We discussed how the fact that it was in a graphic novel version made it accessible to kids who otherwise wouldn't read a 200 or 300 page book. We talked about, a librarian talked about how kids with dyslexia love graphic novels and how this graphic novels open up the world to kids that never could read before. And we just talked about how great it was. And we unanimously passed the book to go back on the shelves. It was like simple as pie, not even a question. It was a young adult title. So they told us this will never go on elementary school shelves. So we just need you to vote on to keep it on the middle and the high school shelves. So unanimous, we voted, and we left and we were so excited. We were like, we saved the Diary of Anne Frank, the graphic novel edition. But one thing I like to add to kind of let you know is I'm 41. So when I read the graphic novel, or when I read the Diary of Anne Frank as a child, I read an abridged version. So a lot of people don't know this. Most of us who are in our, lovely 40s or older, maybe even a little younger, if they read it as children, they were reading an abridged version. Since then, the unabridged version has come out, and most of the copies we're seeing are from her unabridged diaries. So there are parts of the diaries included that some of us have never seen. We think, so because the parent didn't show up to complain about the book, although we did read their complaint, and it said that they felt like the subject material was inappropriate to be read by middle schoolers without parent supervision. So we don't know exactly what they were talking about. Like, is the Holocaust too hard to talk about? Or the other parts of this book, there was a portion where Anne, now remember, she's like a teenager, right? A young teenager. She talks about how she thinks she might be attracted to girls in the book, which most people don't know that she said. And then she also talks about her body. She talks about, as she's going through like puberty, hidden in a, like this factory or wherever she was on that top floor. She talks about like what her body looks like. And she talks about how with men, we know what their genitalia look like because they're on statues. And she talks about the statues she's seen. But whenever she sees statues of women, their legs are tucked together and she has no idea what's going on. And then she kind of discusses a little bit about like her own body and what it must look like. How she can't see it, but she can feel it. Anyway, So we're assuming that those could have been the concerns that someone had, but they didn't show up. Anyway, fast forward a few weeks, and we got a new school board. The elections came, and there was a group of candidates that were running together. They were funded by an ultra right-wing PAC called Patriot Mobile. They're a PAC in the area who, unbeknownst to us, earlier in the year had gone out into the community in 4 different school districts and interviewed candidates that they thought were most likely to push their agenda and bring conservative Christian values into the curriculum of our schools. So they found 11 candidates in 4 school districts. We got 3 of them, and they funded them like crazy. On their website, they brag about spending $1.5 million in school board elections. Based on our research, it looks like they spent a little more than $500,000 in our neck of the woods. And the school board, the elections came and went, and all 11 candidates that they funded and they campaigned for with a campaign of fear tactics, and like I explained it before, that we had all of these mailers, and they won. And all of a sudden they were in charge. And one of the first things they said they were going to do was come into our school districts and take all the porn and save the children from the woke indoctrination, to save them from CRT, to save them from being made to feel guilty for being white, and most important, to save them from pornography. So one of their first goals was to change all of the rules for how we acquire books and how we do book challenges. And they overturned all of the book challenges that we had done in the spring. So all of the ones from those lists, they overturned them all. They said, we don't like any of the results, because we'd actually voted, the community and each of the challenge committees had voted to put all of them back in the libraries. Now, there were some limits, like this one's going to be only in high schools, but all of them were voted to go back, except for genderqueer, the original one, which stayed off. And they were unhappy with the results. They said the committees were stacked and rigged against them, and they were stacked full of liberals. And they overturned every last committee. And then the day before school, I don't know why, clearly they were hiding it from everyone. They sent an email to, the school board clearly instructed the district to send an email to all of the district and let them know, here's a list of 41 books that all must be removed from your shelves by the end of day. And they said, we're going to re-review them, but we don't have a rubric yet. We're creating a new policy for a new rubric. Ultimately, we're calling it the book banning guidelines, because it's a rubric for which books aren't allowed in school. It's not created yet. It hasn't been passed yet. But we're waiting, is my guess, for all of the books to be re-challenged with the Christian conservative values that they promised to bring to the school board. I think the Diary of Anne Frank and the Bible will be back on shelves any day now, because of this tremendous public outcry from around the world, which I'm really grateful for, but I'm really concerned for the remainder of the 39 books, because those didn't get the outcry, right? These 2 did. And the rubric that was written was ultimately written for the purpose of keeping these kinds of books out, right? Like, it was written for one purpose: keep these books that we have a problem with out of schools. So that's where we are. And we hear back from the school. I mean, we're just waiting to get word if the books are going to come back and what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit about what it's like? This seems to be sort of the theme of the past couple of years, watching sort of fringe conversations and panic about things become such a mainstream part of sort of the everyday life of parents trying to just get their kids an education, just like the same talking points that you mentioned at the school boards of everything's woke, everything's pornography, like all of a sudden
everything's pushing a gay agenda. And yeah.
Right. It's like the Alex Jones thing has just come entirely to the front of the conversation. What's it like to sort of experience that on a personal level of
Funny that you say that. There's a mother in the district who comes to the school board meetings in her InfoWars Alex Jones was right t-shirt and speaks at our school board meetings, screaming and yelling about all of these ideas. It's infuriating. And it's the most frustrating part is, fine, we can have these conversations about political topics upon which we disagree, but not in my children's education. Like, leave my children alone. I lean left. I don't need my left-leaning politics, and I don't need my personal moral code as the guiding principle to the entire district curriculum. That's wrong, because my moral code is different than other people's. And that's not the purpose of school. So yeah, it's infuriating. And then to see the most extreme versions of that. But fear is a powerful motivator, man. Nobody votes in school board elections. They're not sexy. They're not the presidential race, right? So nobody votes. But, well, that's not true. Do you know who votes? The extremists. Those are who vote. The angriest and the most fearful people. So when you have a campaign that's 100% fear-based, then all the people that feel that fear, they're the ones that will vote. So we had 10% turnout in our school board election. 10% of the electorate came. About 2/3 of the vote went to these candidates. So we have about we have 6% of the population is running the school district, right? The ideas of 6%. And it's infuriating. To watch it happen in real time is maddening. So right now, finally, when I'm being heard with this whole blow up, as terrible as it is that Anne Frank and the Bible were pulled and the 39 other books, finally somebody's listening to us and they're realizing what's going on here and that it could happen at any district in America. I keep telling people this, you have to vote. It's the only way we fix it is vote in unsexy elections, right? It's infuriating.
Can you also say a little bit more? You mentioned you were on two book committees, right? Not just the Diary of Anne Frank, but another one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could you say a little bit more of sort of what that experience was like on the committees?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most important thing we did was they gave us 2 qualifications that came from the Supreme Court case. It was PICO versus, I want to say Board of Education, but it might not be. It might be something else. It's for sure PICO, P-I-C-O. And that was the Supreme Court case that ultimately established that school boards couldn't ban books based on their own moral code, that libraries and schools are a place of public inquiry, right? This is a public place. So we can't ban books ultimately, but it came down to 2 qualifications. The Supreme Court said there's 2 qualifications that a book has to kind of meet to make this decision. The first one was its educational suitability. And the second one was, profanity. If it was, I forget the word they used, but if it was a lot of profanity, right? And so we had to ask ourselves, is this book educationally suitable? Does it have an educational purpose? That was the first question we asked. And the second question we answered was, is it pervasively vulgar? So it was looking at the book as a whole, right? So if there was 3 lines that talked about a sexual experience that was somewhat graphic, but it's a book of 250 pages and that's an important part of the story, then you would say this isn't pervasively vulgar, right? It looks at every book as a whole. And the committee is all different people and we're all going to have different opinions. And so we would discuss, is this pervasive? Does this have an educational purpose? Does this meet the needs of students? And then the first committee I was on was much longer. I think the meeting went for like almost 2 hours as we discussed the book. And then the one for the Diary of Anne Frank, the graphic novel edition, that one was, like I said, very short, 30, 40 minutes. It was just like, what are we doing here? Like, clearly this is educationally suitable and not pervasively vulgar. But now the school board, instead of asking those 2 questions of a committee, they're going to create a rubric. And it's going to be, does it have this, this, and this? No high school books can have this, this, or this in them. So like one of the examples they're giving is that high school, no book in the entire school district, teachers' classrooms, libraries, anything that comes through those general acquisitions is allowed to discuss and describe sexual assault. So we look at that and it's like, okay, well, that makes sense. We don't need to hear about people sexually assaulting people until you think about like a book like The Kite Runner or a memoir of someone who shares something that happened to them, right? Like we're talking about here censoring sexual assault victims' stories. Now, is The Kite Runner appropriate for 4th grade? No. But could it be appropriate for 12th grade? Yes. And is it my decision? Is it fair of a small subset of parents to say, our moral code is against this book, so none of your children can have access to it? And our library district already had a program in place. If there were books you didn't want your children to have access to, including this list of 800, you could go to the school district and they could be put in the library system that says, my child cannot check out these books. Right? Like it worked. That was already there. There was a system in place, book challenge committees and parental opt-outs. I think we had a pretty great system going. It wasn't perfect. I think there was some room for improvement, but it was a heck of a lot better than what it's looking like now.
Hold on, time out. So you're telling me there was already a system where a parent could tell the school district, don't let my child check out
of these books,
any number of books, so they could personally opt out and not necessarily infringe on anyone else's decision-making in that regard.
100%. And that wasn't good enough.
Fascinating. This is just, It's just amazing to me how many of these conversations we sort of, a lot of us grew up with the idea of like American freedom, oh, you have your freedom, I have my freedom, personal, whatever. And it's fascinating how this sort of just has no bearing on the actual conversation.
Yeah, it's infuriating.
What are you hearing from teachers sort of since August 16th, right? When the superintendent sort of sent out the message that sort of all contested books should be taken out?
The whole book banning or book challenging fiasco from last fall and spring. A lot of us parents kind of started getting together, chatting like, hey, we were meeting each other at school board meetings. Hey, I liked what you said. Let's chat, right? Oh, whatever. And we've created a group of parents that were working together. This group of parents also has a significant number of teachers and librarians in it who are afraid to speak publicly, but will share their concerns with us. And we take them to the district. So that's how this email that told all the teachers and librarians to remove these books from their shelves, that's how I got access to it. I woke up last Tuesday morning. I went to the gym, taught my class, came home. I had a bunch of missed phone calls. I had a bunch of messages from various emails and all sorts of things. And I had quite a few teachers and librarians that had said, Laney, we need you to look at this email right now. Look what they're asking us to do. And I couldn't believe it. And I have a really tight-knit group of friends that we're working really closely at fighting this. In our group text, I immediately messaged them. I said, look at this, look what's going on. And they were like, we've got to get this out there. I tweeted it. I don't have a huge following. I think before all this, I maybe had like 480 followers. But I tagged a few people in the country who are actively like following the stories of censorship and like fighting for public education, and they retweeted me, and that's where kind of it went off. So yeah, do we hear from librarians and teachers? Yes, we are speaking and fighting for them as much as parents. And they're afraid to speak out publicly because there's a group of parents in the community actively seeking to get them fired. There's a group in our community that recently was found to be scouring teachers' Amazon wish lists, looking for books on there that they found problematic, and then trying to get these teachers fired. I mean, they were sharing this in Facebook groups. Like it wasn't like a secret. We have, the screenshots and the names of teachers they were hoping to get fired. So yeah, no, we represent teachers and librarians who are livid and devastated and are completely under outrageous amounts of pressure as they teach school every day.
How does that affect, we're sort of at the same time that this is happening, there's also concern about teacher shortages across the country. So I almost have to ask about how this factors into what are your concerns about sort of losing teachers and librarians and sort of the staffing cost of this?
Oh, it's terrible. So they just did a study in the state of Texas, and I think Keller I think we had one of the highest bad retention rates. Right now, well, as of 2 days ago, I checked online. So school's already started, mind you, and there are 41 certified teacher positions open. It's so bad that our school district actually just announced you don't have to have a teaching certificate to teach anymore. Anybody can apply because they're so desperate for teachers. So yeah, it's awful. It's terrible. And this is one of the things causing it, is this mob of people blaming teachers for the woke indoctrination of their students. I mean, I can't quite figure it out, but yeah, it pisses me off.
You've mentioned that there's sort of on the horizon at some point, this, the revamped sort of system for reviewing the books or whatever.
Books. They're talking about it at our school board meeting tonight, actually. So we might have one tonight. They're being pushed a little faster than they probably would have liked because of the news media.
Right, because everything's been kind of vague in most of those reports. But can you talk about sort of the short-term future, sort of what's happening tonight, what those conversations are now, and what the reaction has been since you sort of blew this so publicly on on Twitter?
Well, right now, tonight's going to be a wild, crazy shit show. They've already said there'll be extra security and police there. We've had police at ours in the past when we're talking. The first time they talked about porn and books, the police had to escort somebody out. Right now, that their camp, the camp of people who really are happy about this, that we're celebrating about the removal of the books, right now, they just want to talk about me personally. So I would venture to say tonight's school board meeting will be huge. Probably half of it will be all about me. They just right now want to blame me. They're calling me a liar. They're saying I'm lying to the media, bringing everybody in, claiming they banned books. And they firmly stand in the fact that they have not banned books. They just pulled them off the shelves for re-review according to their new. And that's fine. If they want to say, I don't say banning. I say removing it from the shelves and removing it from the online catalog until we can decide if we think it's appropriate. Like, okay, fine. I'm not going to argue with words. You don't want to say ban, don't say ban. I'm fine with that. But they are convinced that I personally am destroying the school district. So that's tonight. Our school board president made a whole post all about me with my name included. The Kellertown Republicans made an entire Facebook post all about me, trying to disparage me, discredit me, call me a liar. So here we are. I mean, yeah, the school board meeting tonight, we would love to talk about the issues, but it's not going to be about the issues. They're just going to talk about how angry they are with me for doing this to them. They're going to deflect, and they're going to deflect because they recognize that they are puppets. They were completely funded by a PAC who has an agenda amongst 4 school districts. They're all working together. Our district was assigned creating book banning policies. Our neighboring district tonight is meeting. They're Grapevine, Colleyville. They were assigned to rewrite some anti-trans and like anti-CRT policies. Now, what's going to happen is they're going to see if they pass in our districts and work, and then they're just going to trade them so that all of the districts in the area will have the same policies. And we know this because as soon as all of these school boards were elected, they all went and hired outside counsel. So even though all of our school districts have in-house counsel, they all hired attorneys to represent them as the board, but all 4 boards hired the same attorney. So yeah, they don't want to have these conversations. Why would they have these conversations? Because they'd have to admit what they're doing, even though they keep saying, no, this is for the kids. We're doing this for the community. But from my perspective, that's not true. I think to a degree, they might really believe themselves. So, right, whatever. I think that we convince ourselves of all sorts of things. But so yeah, that's what the school board meeting is going to be about tonight, is them deflecting and placing all the blame on me. And then unfortunately letting the school district take the fall, when really the school district is at the behest of the school board. Because the curriculum director, this is the worst thing to come out of all of this, is when I tweeted the email, it came from her. So all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, this woman is an anti-Semite, or, oh, this woman is a bigot. And they decide to go for her personally. When no, she's the curriculum director. And this was a direction from the school board. That's how it works. She didn't have a choice. So that's been frustrating to watch, just to watch so many people want to like call her out for it. Like, come on, read the stories. Like, look what's going. I even put it in my tweet. This is not the teachers, administrators, or staff. They are amazing. This is the school board. But, us human beings, we're really bad at reading the whole story. We just run off with our ill-conceived notions. So, and we're all guilty of it. I mean, I have this, right? So yeah, that'll be the school board meeting tonight.
Can I sort of relatedly ask, there's been a sort of conversation over the past couple of years that's grown about harassment online, but particularly towards women, because women get sort of the brunt of harassment that guys just do not experience online. And there's been a lot of sort of social media companies have just not sort of picked up on it. And there's been some resources actually in the past year or so that have been published specifically on account of that from some of the disinformation professionals. What's it like dealing with just the vitriol and the harassment that's coming after you as a result of being so public on this?
So I knew I knew that this could come. I recognized when I was getting into this, I knew people already hated me just for speaking at the school board meetings in like a calm manner. And during the campaign, I watched some people get angry. So every time, even though I didn't have a lot of followers, every time I tweeted, I knew that there was a chance. And what my hope was eventually that people would listen. So I knew this was coming. Generally, it's been okay. I have a really good support system. First of all, I'm not alone. I'm not the only parent fighting against this, right? We have this secret Facebook group that's about 500 of us that we vet very carefully, and then I have a team of us that are working together, and then I have another team of parents from all the surrounding school districts. We all found each other after the election. And it's the 4 school districts. We have a team of all of us working in our individual school districts and bringing information back, but we're all supporting each other. So that's been really helpful. The last few days, the attacks have picked up significantly. One of the Patriot Mobile employees, her name is Jolynn. She published my full legal name online and talked about how I was going, like destroying the schools. And to post my full government name, which is it's not Laney. It's not what I go by. No one, like most of my friends don't even know my full legal name. And to publish that with my full, like my maiden name, my last name, my full legal name, I don't go by Laney. I go by Laney. Nobody calls me anything else. Her purpose to share that was to encourage harassment and potentially severe harassment, because that's my name that's attached to all of my mortgage, my credit, so yeah, so I'd say the last few days have been hard. I had like this pit in my stomach, right? But I have a really good support system. So we're going to make it through. Like, this is worth it. I knew what I was getting myself into. The people online saying Laney's a terrible person destroying families. I don't really care. Like, what? Okay, sure, whatever. But when the local Republican club posts pictures of me, like, okay, that to me, like a bunch of grown men, because it's all the men in the school that run the Republican Party here, right? All of these like super wealthy, like well-connected men, and so now they're just like, hey, let's go bully this mom because we don't like what she's saying. Let's talk about the issues. I'm happy to talk about the issues, but now it's just about me. Luckily, I don't have too many skeletons in my closet. I'm just like a boring mom of 4 kids. So they're not going to find a whole lot. They're getting desperate.
Right. And just to be clear, so you don't actually want pornography in schools.
Oh my God. It's so funny. I have to remember to say that at the end. Like, no one wants pornography in schools. In fact, I don't think every book is appropriate for age level. And even at the same age, I don't think every book is appropriate for every child. I have 4 children and they're all different. My son is the kind of kid who wants knowledge and he wants information. He wants to read and see and learn and talk about everything. And I can't keep him from anything. He's going to go get it. He's going to find it, right? So we talk about it. We talk about the issues. We talk about hard things. When he sees pornography on somebody's phone at school, he tells me, we discuss it, right? Because that's where he's seeing pornography, by the way, is at the lunch table on his friends' phones, which has happened multiple times. All right. So let's be real. That's where the pornography is. But my daughter is a little more sensitive and like difficult events and situations upset her. She doesn't like to read and learn about horrific acts and events. And so she probably won't be ready for certain books at certain ages. So yeah, no, I don't even think that non-pornography is for every child at every age. I think that I, as a parent, should make the decision for my children and not for everyone else's children. And the same is vice versa. So that's what I believe. So yeah, I mean, I also believe that, hey, there might be some, I don't know what's going to happen. Do all things belong on school shelves? No, because blatant pornography surely doesn't. I don't want to see Hustler or Playboy on my kids' library shelves. But these books are not that. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morris. Come on, that's not pornography. Kite Runner. Or like the children's book, I Am Jazz. And to call them pornography is disingenuous and it just shuts down the conversation.
And just to fully get at the sort of the why behind this, why is it important that students have access to these books? What does our education system lose when we're trying to ban books and investigate teachers on accusations of spreading pornography?
And grooming children. That's their favorite word, remember, is to call these teachers groomers. Well, first of all, most of the books, I think someone actually ran the numbers, like 90% of the books that were on this specific list that our district pulled last week from the shelves are written by women, people of color, and LGBTQ authors. All right. So what's important is that every child has access to materials where they can find heroes that represent them, that they can see themselves in. And guess what? Unfortunately, the lives of the kids in our state, in our city, in our country, they aren't fairy tales. They're not all sunshine and lollipops. A lot of kids have rough lives where they've experienced horrible things. They've seen horrible things. A lot of kids are LGBTQ. We have all sorts of kids of color in this district, right? It's not that diverse, but we do have some diversity and it's great. But these kids, especially the ones that have in rough lives or are very marginalized, they're the ones that need to see it the most because society has rejected them to a degree, right? So yeah, it's completely damaging. And then let's say to someone like my children, who generally speaking, were pretty darn privileged, right? My husband and I are both highly educated. We're white. Our kids have access. We'll always have access to this information. And they have a lot of privilege. But when my children get to go read books about the rest of life and the rest of the world, they get to become compassionate. They get to become innovative. They get to open up their eyes. All my children know is the life they have in front of them. Books open up the rest of the world. It's stories that I would never be able to tell them because I don't know all the stories in the world, right? Perspectives I couldn't share because they're not about me. So it's going to make my children more compassionate. It's also going to give them tools because they're going to have knowledge. if there's something I've learned in life, it's that we shouldn't be afraid of information, right? We shouldn't see information as a threat, even if it's gritty or something we're uncomfortable with. If my children have access to something that makes them uncomfortable, whatever, we can talk about it. We can be empowered by the situation. So yeah, right? Yeah, I feel pretty strongly about giving children access to these stories and these books and having access in schools. And if these parents don't want their kids to have it, they can just walk on down to the library and the school district and say, please don't let my child check out any of the books from this list. And the library will respect those wishes.
So the last question I have for you is sort of the long distance view. What do you expect will come next in the bigger picture, either for this book banning movement in your district, more broadly for Texas or the country? What's your long-term outlook on what parents in this country should expect from, their kids' literary education, given all this?
What we've learned is how important it is to continue to educate people on the issues and really, really encourage people to do due diligence and coming down to vote and who they're voting for. And that the most important elections in your lives are the ones that are in your neighborhood, because those are actual real policies you can affect, but that also affect you directly. So one big thing, I guess, is I think I'm going to be this advocate for voting in non-sexy elections. Pretty hardcore, right? I also, deep down inside, I have this hope that this is this last hurrah of the terrified, Christian nationalists, where they realize that that's not acceptable anymore and that they're panicked and that's why they're lashing out. And I think we're moving toward a world that can maybe respect each other's, to acknowledge that, yeah, there are a lot of Christians in America, but there are a lot of other people too. And public school is the place for all of them. And our curriculum needs to be based in best educational practices, not religious ideology. So I'm hopeful that we're moving away from that and that this is some last desperate hurrah. And our kids are really smart. And I'm seeing that with these kids, with kids and their access to information. So they're going to get it. Kids are going to get it. So we need to teach them what to do with it and how to handle it. I just think kids are really smart. And I think that's part of where the panic has come from, is a lot of parents are watching their children grow up, maybe accepting things differently than they would want them to and believing in a world differently than what the parents lived with. And it's just a lot of change and they're scared. But I do believe in the next generation. I'm very hopeful. And I mean, that hope and that optimism is kind of what gets me moving and keeps me going. So we're just going to keep talking and shining a light on what's going on here and fighting to educate.
This has been this week's The Jews Are Tired podcast. I'm Lev Gringaus. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and hopefully next week, the Jews will get some rest. The Jews Are Tired is a product of Jewfolk Inc. For more information, go to tcjewfolk.com or email the show at podcast@tcjewfolk.com. A link to the transcript of this episode is available in the podcast notes, along with links to any news, stories, or reports referenced for this episode.